This is Growing Up Aspen Season 2, where we're actually going to deep dive with a bunch of folks that we actually grew up with. Usually it's Chris Pomeroy and myself, Andy Collin, but today it's just Mike Marolt and I. And it's interesting because I feel like as kids, we've always been sort of looking, because you come from Aspen, so you're labeled as the spoiled person. You're labeled as, whatever, you can't do anything or whatever. And it's like, so all we had to do was just push ourselves. So in a way, it's kind of interesting as a kid going against other teams. We didn't really have a fair chance, but we figured out how to just do that. And it's like when I was talking to Mark Taché, here you are for the first time in the gates, and now you're up against Ingomar and the Mayer brothers, and you're the young kid, oh my gosh, what's that like? And it's like at some point you have to just realize, hey, I'm just racing Dave Stapleton, and put that in your head and remember that you're going down the gates like that one race down Racer's Edge, and I feel like when you talk about the different cultures and the groups and stuff, I was wondering, can you kind of speak to the difference between the alpine climbing community and the alpine skiing community? Because it felt like there was a little bit of a difference. One of the things that you guys thread the difference, like I did with snowboarding, was you thread the difference between skiing and alpine. In other words, a lot of people were just climbers. They didn't really think about skiing that much. I mean, we saw the man who skied down Everest when we were kids, so it was in our head,
Well, yeah, I mean, it was huge. And coming from a background of alpine ski racers, Olympians. I mean, Dad was an Olympian, Uncle Bill was an Olympian, and Bud, my oldest uncle from the Marolt side, he made the Olympic team, but he decided that, he got married and he decided not to go. I mean, so I'm coming from almost a royalty of ski racing, and that's the way that I thought.
Right.
And I looked at guys like Lou Dawson and Chris Landry. I mean, when Chris Landry skied Pyramid, I was already getting into backcountry skiing. And I read that article in Sports Illustrated, and we laughed. I mean, we thought those guys were just, crazy, misguided, just basic bums that were, out there just
thrill seekers.
What was driving them? But we thought they were crazy. We thought they were insane. And we were ski racers, and it's like we would look at pictures of these guys, and these Europeans, and even Mira skiing, falling down the face of Lhotse face on Everest, and we thought those guys don't know how to ski. And it's like, then you look at my films skiing Everest, beyond skiing Everest, and you realize that those guys were damn good skiers, and that they're skiing in an environment where it's really difficult, but you can't fall. I mean, it's more utilitarian, and it was, but yeah, I mean, there was a lot. I mean, I remember the locals around here, they'd see these guys going off the back Aspen Mountain or the back of Highlands, and they were outlaws. I mean, that's how people looked at them.
Yeah.
It was just, the sport was so new, and it wasn't until I started to evolve to a different level that I really gained a lot of respect for those guys and really appreciated what they were doing and where they were doing it, and really just had total, I went from, thinking they're just beatniks to thinking, those guys that's what I want to do. Those guys are amazing, and they are amazing. What they did with the gear that they had was
right. Yeah.
Was amazing. But yeah, I mean, here again, in this whole journey, I mean, there have just been so many 180-degree changes in the way that I operate within that activity. And it's not just the way I operate, but the way that I think and the way that I look at it. I mean, it's just been unbelievable. It's been just so interesting when I look back. And that's the beauty of writing these books. You get to go back in time and place yourself back when you were a young guy, even a kid. And it's amazing how you thought comes back to you. And then you contrast that with the way you look at this activity today. It's unbelievable. It's crazy.
It feels too like you change from knowing everything and being a specialist to always just learning, which is a little different. It's a little bit more humble. It's a little more like Tom Crum, seeing the Buddha and all the stuff that comes your way, in a sense. You know what I mean? Where,
Andy, it's interesting because, and I've taken a lot of flack for saying this, but the analogy that I use are those locals on the north side of Hawaii that have been for generations surfing those big waves, and then newcomers come in from the States, from California and stuff, and they try to become part of that culture, and it's difficult, and it's difficult because for people that grew up with a history of people surfing those waves, ocean kids they're just different, and I think that starting with 8th grade outdoor ed, having a father who lost a lot of friends in avalanches, and having Callahan's dad who was in mountain rescue, we have a hyper sense of fear for what those mountains can dole out, and it's not to say that people can't move from other places and learn how to be safe. That's been proven time and time again. But there's a different mentality, and it's hard to explain. There is a completely different mentality in the minds of guys that grew up in the mountains, that continued to climb and ski and take it to, loftier levels, than the transplant who moves to the mountains and becomes, a ski mountaineer. There's just a difference.
Well, I gotta say, even when I moved in, I felt like an implant, but I quickly I didn't want to change anything. I didn't want to put my footprint on it. I just wanted to be part of the local crowd. And I could tell you, deep entrenched in the community was the 10th Mountain Division. I mean,
well, of course.
That was a big part of that ski. When that ski town went in as a ski town, the 10th Mountain Division pretty much were the instructors, were the builders. They pretty much were a key force in that. So that incorporated into the town, and growing up under that is sort of a unique situation that we had. Vail's got its thing, whatever, but Aspen had that 10th Mountain Division, and that was kind of a very interesting influence. That it was a influence along with a lot of other ones. And as I was reading Lou's book, the stories about him with his accident on the backside of Aspen Mountain and then getting caught in the bowl. This is a great example of living vicariously through other guys that are breaking trail, that allowed me to better understand what I was doing. Andy, in my entire life climbing and skiing, I have never ducked the rope off of Highlands or Aspen Mountain. And the reason I have never done that is because even before I knew a lot about avalanches and all that kind of stuff, I was peppered with so many stories about town of people getting into trouble back there. And Dad just always warned us, it's just, the snowpack here is terrible. And I didn't really understand that till later in life. And the 10th Mountain, Bud, my uncle, he was an instructor at Camp Hale. And so we're surrounded by people that really drilled into us to really respect it. When you look at even Callahan and all those guys that were in the original mountain rescue, and my grandpa was part of it too, those guys weren't trained. Right.
They were going off of the same things rules that were influencing them. They saw people get into trouble. They didn't know snow crystals. They didn't know about snowpack. They just knew it was dangerous. And so it was almost a lack of understanding was superseded by just black and white, real life tragedies that impacted them and made them conservative. And that flowed through to us. And then you throw in 8th grade outdoor ed where they're teaching you to respect the environment and to respect the mountains, and they're teaching you about weather, and they're teaching you, it's basically, driver's ed films of what to do and what not to do. And those are the influences that come to a person that grows up in the mountains. I mean, if you're a guy and you're 25 or 30 years old and you move to Aspen and you get into this stuff, you don't have that history. You don't have the influences that we were bombarded with.
Yes.
So we're just different. And it's the same for those surfers on the north side. I know a couple of those guys, and they said there's just do's and don'ts that are not taught in a classroom that you just understand, because over time you see people making mistakes. And so we're the beneficiaries of that. But it's not to say that you can't come and learn it. And it's not to say that all the technical stuff is bad. It's great, but it's just different.
Thanks for listening to Growing Up Aspen, a Joiner's Table podcast with our classmates. We'd like to thank the Aspen Times and the Aspen Daily News for letting us include some of their materials in our book, Growing Up Aspen, Adventures of the Unsupervised. The authors would like to thank you. If you're interested, you can check out our book at twistandturnpress.com.